B marker.
Okay, we got, now just keep rolling.
Right off the bat when we started shooting, we went to Alaska, and we were shooting at the end of spring where there's still a ton of snow, and it's freezing cold, and so we get there, and it's just action. Climb up that snowy hill, and I go, okay. So I get up the hill, and then it kind of goes down into a trench of snow, and it's up to my waist, and I'm like falling down. Cut! And I kind of wait there, like, you know, expecting a helicopter to airlift me out back to the starting point. And then I hear, well, come on back from Sean. And this is day one. So I dig in and I climb up the snow, and I knew from then on that it was, you know, he was kind of testing me to see how ready to step into the wild I was. And from that day on, there was no fooling around in the wilderness.
Sean sets the tone. Directors often do. And if they're willing to jump into the boat and do it, or have the crappy trailer, or not have one at all, or have the small little tiny motel room that everybody has, then you're like, we're all in the same team here. You know, you feel encouraged by that.
It's true that part of the director's job is creating the environment, but it shouldn't be underestimated how much of that environment is meant to be set up to stimulate the director himself. So what we do is try to create a little bit of a desperate situation, and so that we're all dealing with the same thing together, and that if we don't do our jobs fully, it will not work, it'll collapse. So you try to keep it at that level all the time, because I don't think you can get through 8 months without it.
We could have done this film in Utah, where you could try to do everything in one place and cheat things to make it look like the various locations. But in fact, Sean and all of us had kind of signed on to the idea that we wanted to be as true to the story as we could, and that meant going to those places that Chris actually went to and experienced, so we weren't cheating really anything.
My job in this was to say, here's what I want to do. I want to have as much of a chronological approach on this as possible. At the same time, I need these extremes, and I also need the weather conditions to change in the places where these things occur, all simultaneously in an 8-month shooting period. And I'm sure, as complicated as it was, I like to believe that I have no idea still today just how complicated that was.
And with Into the Wild, there's quite a dramatic situation that occurs. Obviously, toward the end, he goes through a significant weight loss, and it affected all those kind of things. The way the schedule laid out and the way Emil participated, it just couldn't have gone better.
I didn't actually start out at my thinnest. I started out fit, and for me it was a challenge just with the dieting all the time. You know, it was a very, very, very strict diet I was on, and when you eat that healthy, you think it will satisfy your hunger, but I soon learned that my hunger was never satisfied. Hello, so today is the final day of my weight loss, and I went from 156, and today I hit 115, and it was long. I started right around Sundance of 2006, so it's been January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, so that's 8 months of dieting. That's 41 pounds. I'm really excited to start eating again.
I'm gonna open it. Take a bite.
Sniff it. You want to sniff it?
You know, I want to have people who are going to be mutually supportive of each other. You can't be somebody who's interested in winning popularity contests and direct a movie. But this story had so much devotion from everybody involved that whenever I was the bastard, they still wanted the best movie out of this thing. I mean, everybody.
All right.
Derek Hill really functioned as much more than a production designer. He's a soldier in the way he approaches his job. He happens to have a great aesthetic talent.
One of the first trips that we did in the small group, I think there were 4 of us or 6 of us, we went to Alaska to the bus to see the actual location, the actual bus, and see what the elements were. We photographed it very well, and then Sean decided that he didn't want to shoot in the real bus in honor of the family and Chris. So we put the search out for a 1940s International Harvester. We ended up finding a couple of options on the buses, and we combined the 2 pieces of the buses to recreate the exact bus.
The bus became kind of my home. It was like, the one consistent places that we were shooting in nature that I kept returning to. So I grew really fond of the bus, and me and the bus had kind of gone through a lot of experiences together, even though the bus doesn't move. Where are you going? I told you, we're going nowhere!
Each location presented its own unique characteristics that made it a challenge. When we shot in Arizona near Lake Mead for the detrital wash, we were at the exact location where Chris had been for the flash flood scene, and it was 2 miles up from a 2-lane road up this wash. The temperature that day that we shot there was around 115, 120 degrees, extremely hot, sort of in the middle of nowhere.
Start again, you didn't get up high enough.
And then we shot in Carthage, South Dakota, where the Cabaret Bar is, the actual cabaret that appears in the book. A small town of less than 200 people, yet the people there really embraced us, and we quickly learned, don't go running off 40 miles to a town that might have what you need. First ask them, where can we find something? And they would almost always know exactly which person in town to go to, and you could almost always get the thing you needed.
All right, in Gordon's clearing, and roll it.
Well, I knew that the cinematographer was going to be a very key person on this movie in accomplishing the feeling that I want this to have in the balance of light and color. And I knew that this time I was going to do more handheld stuff. So I've always liked to have a cameraman who's also the DP. I don't like having another filter between the 2 of us. I knew that I was going to be doing a lot of operating, but that there were certain things that needed somebody with much more skill, and also that understood that I was going to make the impossible demands and expect them to be achievable. Make this look the best it can look, but not in 10 minutes right now, because the actor's ready now. The sky's right now. And Eric Goodyear can do that. And I first saw the Motorcycle Diaries, and that led me down that road. I asked Eric to come here, and we sat down, and very quickly I thought, this is the right guy.
And see the owl somewhere from there. Right there.
It was very clear up front what I was looking for. A lot of it was detailed in the script. And so my department heads really took that on, and in all cases brought that much more to it, but in the spirit of what it was I was looking for.
Sometimes I used things that were already on people. Sometimes I was thrift storing. Sometimes I was dyeing and building. When it came around to Chris McCandless's clothing, for one pair of jeans you have to have about 25 because he goes through different weight changes. And so as he got skinnier, the clothes needed to get just a little bit bigger, but not where you would think that wardrobe has cheated. We're kind of cheating silently because the actor did also lose a tremendous amount of weight. So all of Chris McCandless's clothing told a story of where he had been.
Roll sound. Okay, we're rolling. Rolling.
Ed Tice was the sage of the movie. And we ended up with almost all production sound in the movie. It really was amazing what he was able to achieve.
Okay, nice. I thought a lot about how to record the sound. How can I always be ready? And I use a remarkable little recorder made in France, made by the camera people, Aton, that is a terribly robust recorder that I knew I could base everything around. And if I could record enough extra sound, not just when we were shooting, that there would be a feeling when he was dragging his canoe across the sand dunes that it was actually him dragging that thing across the sand dunes, and it was the way the wind sounded that day. And you see these little moments of sync, which brings you into the story even more. It's terribly important to me.
The tracks when Emil is talking to Hal Holbrook in the car at the end, there's not an added sound effect. There's no added Foley. It's just what Ed recorded. You know, the two of them having that discussion.
What do you say? You let me adopt you. I could be, say, your grandfather.
It's the production track. There's just not one added track, and probably very little alteration of that track.
We did everything you're never supposed to do in a movie. When you hear the word water, you should take it out of the script. When you hear the word snow, you take it out of the script. When you hear, mountaintops, you take it out of the script. We didn't take any of those things out of the script. So there were so many issues that we had to confront, and to still manage to do this in an independent fashion is kind of quite spectacular.
I'd never been to South Dakota. I'd never been to Alaska. I'd never been to Astoria, Oregon. I'd never been to El Golfo in Mexico. It was funny, at the end of production, they made this Into the Wild crew t-shirt, and it just had all the places that we'd been to. And it was like a rock concert, a rock tour concert, where there's 30 locations. You're just like...
The editing they have done in the film of this flash forward to what was happening to him when he went into the wilderness and then back, leading up to it. It created a suspensefulness because you see what's happening up ahead, and you see his journey up to it.
And background action!
We had, very close to 1 million feet of film in the editing room, and the assembly was very long. There was not a lot in the assembly that I was willing to get rid of. Again, I had some ideas of how I was going to collage some things, but it's all theory until you get there.
The script was totally linear, so he just said we'll figure out after he shot it, which is what we did. And the story is episodic by nature, so they reflect where Chris went on his trip.
And it was a lot of sculpting. And that was, time that I spent with Jay Cassidy. And fortunately, we have, a pretty full history and an enormous amount of trust and faith in each other. So I think that, had it not been the case, had he not been such a kind of diligent editor, we'd still be in the editing room right now.
The soundtrack is beautiful. Michael Brook and Kaki King are just superb, and it adds such a dramatic intensity and grace to the landscapes that you go through. And also, Eddie Vedder is composing or is making several original songs.
Got a call from Sean and just said, have you read this book? And I want to show you this movie. And then he showed it to me, and it was great. And I didn't see why he needed any help with it, or there didn't seem to be anything missing. There was some good music in it already. Because the question was like, what do you need? What do you want? And then he just said, just go with it. Just go see what happens.
Gonna rise up, find my direction magnetically. I'm gonna rise up, throw down my ace in the hole.
This was really different because you were writing to the film, you were writing to the story, this story. And it really, it took away so many choices. And instead of feeling like you were working within boundaries, they were actually a set of parameters that were really helpful.
The movie was always structured with the idea of, as I had done on the Indian Runner, leaving out certain information to make room for the songs to give it, and therefore to have a movie which the structure of which allowed songs to play as a co-narrator. And Eddie Vedder, to me, he's my favorite voice of the American spirit that's attached to my sense of the American heart.
There's great authenticity to the journey, but I think what makes it more powerful is that it's authentic to the spirit of Chris and who he really was in a very complicated way. He wasn't just some nice kid who was going on an adventure and got in over his head. He was a kid with a lot of issues. And I think what was truly authentic about the movie, and a far harder job than just duplicating an adventure, was that I think they captured the authenticity of this guy.
Corinne is thrilled. Most of the family is thrilled. The parents go in and out. It's a tough situation for them. You know, I think it's been a very selfless decision that they've made to let this story be told.
It's this kind of movie that I suspect will leave a big impression on people for a long time. It makes people think about a lot of things, and you know, you see this movie, you'll be thinking about it for weeks, which is what a good movie should do. I mean, it doesn't spoon feed you stuff. It's disturbing. It makes you wonder. You go back and forth, but it's a very good movie.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why people identify with the story is everyone has that need for adventure, and he's someone who did it, who went for it. You know, we all have those feelings. What if I just went on an adventure? What would happen? And he did it, and everyone wants to do that, really. But you know, there's so many things that prevent us from doing that, and you know, for not necessarily the wrong reasons. And when he finally died, he had done what so many people always wonder, well, what if I did that? And just by crossing that threshold, he had succeeded. What if I were smiling and running into your arms? Would you see then what I see now?
Have no fear for when I'm alone. I'll be better off than I was before. I've got this life. I'll be around to grow who I was before. I cannot